Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Thank you for joining me today. I have the pleasure to be joined today by David Knight, somebody who I've been looking forward to talking with. That we have a lot of interesting overlaps, our audiences overlap, and one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to him on our show, and I've been on his show before, is to discuss some of these different two-party illusion aspects, which I'm really, I'm always trying to connect with people out there that I feel really truly see through what I think is the biggest kind of hindrance to change in this conversation, or just in politics in general, in the United States in particular. And so I wanted to invite him on today to talk about sort of the rising problem of the mainstream alternative media, the conversation we've been having about the right sort of being played through a lot of the different dynamics, and just a lot of other things I thought it'd be fun to overlap with him today. So David, how are you? Good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be on. I do really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I really think that the more that we can connect with, and again, I'm sure you would agree, I'm guarantee we have things we don't agree on. And yeah. I think that's what the important thing is to kind of realize that is okay and have these conversations. But the focal point for me is to really continue to highlight and make connections with people that see the two-party illusion as one of the biggest problems. And maybe we'll just start with that question. I know you discussed the two-party illusion and its problems, but where do you see that in sort of the hierarchy of our problems in the political conversation?
Well, I think that's essential. When we look at what is happening, they've done everything they can for years. When all this stuff started happening in 2020 about contesting the election, I said, well, I'm not seeing an honest election yet. There's always an opportunity for somebody to cheat. And if you put all of the money and power of a very powerful and wealthy nation like America, if you put all that into Washington, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to see the amount of money being donated to politicians just grow exponentially. Mm-hmm. And they're not really opposing each other. They're really on the same page. And over again, we see this. When we look at the pandemic, for example, why aren't they calling out the other people? Well, because they did the same thing themselves.
Right.
They all supported this. They paid the money for it, and they'll find some fine point that something that they did. For example, the Republicans, it's safe for them to say, well, we didn't mandate it. Well, you were going to, right. And they already, and the other part of it is that they incentivized it. The plan going back to 9/11, if you look at what happened in 2001, 2 months before 9/11, they had the first one of these germ games, Dark Winter. Then a week after, they had the anthrax attack. And then 2 months later, they pushed out model legislation. And then every year, they practiced one of these germ games. And you had almost all the states enacted virtually all of that Model State Health Emergency Powers Act. And so they wanted to get around the 10th Amendment. And the thing that really enabled it was having it funded out of Washington. And, when you declare the emergency order, what that does is that releases the money. In the same way, if you have a hurricane or something come through an area, the declaration of an emergency releases the money. So, they're playing this phony dichotomy that is there. They'll find a few issues where they will oppose each other. And then if it's something that is really egregious, they might have some hearings or something on it, but nothing ever happens. They don't cut the funding. Nothing ever happens. There's not even an inquiry about COVID. In the UK, they had an inquiry. And it was used to cover things up pretty much like we did with the Warren Commission and the JFK assassination. Usually they'll use a commission to cover it up, but evidently they felt like there wasn't enough pushback and resistance from the American people that they even needed to do that.
Well, what do you think changed? Right. I mean, obviously it's still the same problematic dynamic, but like you point out that, like what I've seen in the past, for example, is kind of like an unspoken agreement that you won't try to go after the previous president. Like it's kind of a known unspoken dynamic, but that's changed. Right. So what do you see changing in that and to where we are today, and how kind of the rules within their dynamic have changed?
Well, I think the Republicans and Democrats, obviously, these politicians are competing against each other in this Game of Thrones, and it's for real, that kind of competition. Right. I would liken it to what I believe happened with the internet. The internet was designed in the 1960s with J.C.R. Licklider, a DARPA psychologist, but they didn't have the hardware to pull it off. Once the switching circuitry got up to the bandwidth that they needed in the 1990s, CIA came out with In-Q-Tel, their own venture capital firm. They went public with it. They didn't care. And if you look at so many of these venture capital firms, they've got people from the CIA, from the NSA, and all these different agencies that are setting on the venture capital firms. They gave a lot of money to a lot of different competitors and then set back and made the best man win. They wanted to have a competition to fine tune that. And they want to have a competition between the political parties because they want to make it look real. When in reality, they're both essentially on the vital issues. They're taking orders from the same people. And in the same way that when you go back and you look at the George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter election, right? It was clear they wanted to push through NAFTA. The fly in the ointment was Ross Perot at that point in time. But they were both, the Republicans, Democrats wanted to push through NAFTA, regardless of who got in. When you look at Romney versus Obama, they wanted to get Obamacare or Romney Care, which had already, same thing, had been done in Massachusetts. Mitt Romney with Ted Kennedy. Either Republican or Democrat, you're still going to get that key thing. So they've got a key thing that they want to run through. But they want to have this idea that this is the most important election of your life.
Every time.
every 4 years is the most important election of your life. And you've got to vote for the lesser two evils. I know you don't like this guy, but isn't that other guy really horrible? And by keeping the dynamics of two people, it allows them to do that. If you were to bring in a third person, that really messes that up. And because then you have to start talking about issues. And I think one of the things that's really helped this a great deal, and why they're going after other people more specifically, is because of Trump. And I think, you know, the fact that he's there and he's got some sharp elbows and he's pushing things around, they push back. Now, I would be surprised to see them put him in jail. It's one thing to convict somebody of felonies and to destroy their reputation, that type of thing. But if you cross that Rubicon of putting your opponent in jail, that means that the next election you lose, you're likely to go to jail as well. So we'll see what happens with it. I don't know if you saw what happened the last 24 hours. We had Scott Ritter's house, the guy who was the weapons inspector who pushed back against the lies on the Iraq War. His house was raided. And he said they're coming after him for a supposed FARA violation, a Foreign Agent Registration Act violation. So it's not true, but they took away a dozen boxes of electronics and things like that. And then to go fishing. And then at the same time, within about the last 24 hours or so, there's been several stories about Tulsi Gabbard, who is now on the Quiet Skies watch list. And they've got marshals following her around everywhere she flies. They've got 5 to 7 people following her around. And that began the day after she criticized Lala Harris. I call her Kamala or Kamala. I call her Lala because she's kind of ditzy. But as soon as she criticized Harris on Fox News, that order was issued the next day. And these are whistleblowers from inside the Air Marshal program who don't like this. And we shouldn't, any of us, tolerate that type of thing.
Well, let me ask you this. So with Gabbard, like, I think Scott Ritter stands out as obvious political persecution. I mean, the mail very well may be, but you make the point about Trump. And what I think is interesting, or Gabbard for that same point, is it, I mean, obviously, I think it shows that he plays the game. Let me ask you this as straightforward. Do you see it as Donald Trump being within that game as part of the problem, but simply, as you said, the elbows, like he's sort of a wild card and that's kind of pressuring him back to stay in line, or that he is outside of that? And then how do you see Gabbard in the same conversation? Are they being persecuted? Or is this meant to make us feel that that's the case and there's something different happening?
Well, I like the way it was described by Dave Chappelle. He said, you know, here's Trump. He comes out of this inside, you know, there's this big club and he walks out the outside. He tells you exactly all the garbage that's going on there. And then he walks back in and joins it again. You know, so it is this back and forth with Trump. He really is a wild card because, you know, he comes from a background of celebrity and entertainment and all this thing. And you know, just like, you know, Kamala, he's a chameleon as well. I mean, they're all chameleons. They don't really have any principles. They don't want to have a debate even anymore. They don't even want to pretend to have an election. So I think that, yeah, he's wise to all that, but his game is simply a power game. And if he gets that thrown, and he's been pretty upfront about that, surprisingly. And so he has said, yeah, I gave money to Lala when she was in California. That's my job, to, you know, to buy things from politicians. And so that's why he wants to be a politician, because he wants people paying him instead of him paying other people. It's like The Godfather, you know, it's that kind of, and he's upfront about it. Doesn't even really care. And the other thing that's interesting is that Joe Biden, with Joe Biden there or Lala there, people are saying, wait a minute, the president's not really doing anything. There's somebody that we're not seeing who's actually running the show because he can't tie his shoes.
Right. Well, so you make the point about Trump, essentially not like, I guess I kind of took as your point is that he didn't actually go to prison. He didn't get charged. And because like the worry would be if you did that, then it would be reciprocal. So that makes me think that you feel that it's sort of a theater to a degree, right?
Yeah.
And at the idea being that ultimately it's to make people think that he is the kind of persecuted hero, so I find it hard not to see that as, somebody who is perpetuating the problem, but I mean, I will say right out of the gate that I think we all said the same thing. Like the one thing I like about him is that he really does, we're there for the oil. It's like, well, good. At least that's wrong and it's a crime, but at least I like that he's telling us that, and that's I think everybody could agree on that. And so that's maybe why there's sort of a pushback on, hey, don't be so much of a wild card, so I don't know. I think that we agree on that. So it's interesting. So where do you see that going as this goes into the election? I guess in a broader question, I didn't even plan to get into this necessarily, but I find it interesting to see how that plays out. Like to me, that sounds like, well, we're going to lose either way because everybody in there is playing the game. I mean, I think that's how I feel anyway.
I agree. What I've told people is I said, look, vote for whoever you want to vote for, if you want to vote. I'm not interested
I agree.
in voting with either one of these guys, but look, I'm not going to fight you if you want to vote for somebody, but what I will fight you over is joining the cult. What I'll fight you over is going into a civil war for one of these people. And I'm seeing this a lot. And this is a narrative that's kind of really escalating. Just this last week, we had John Voight saying, well, that's it. It's going to be civil war. And we've heard some of this talk before. We've heard some of it from Steve Bannon and from Alex Jones and people like that. But, they keep pushing it. John Voight does it. And then Biden says, well, I don't think there's going to be a peaceful transfer of power. And so we got both the left and the right, and you got Jamie Raskin saying, if Donald Trump wins, we're going to fight him on the 14th Amendment. We're not going to let him get in there. I think they're setting us up with this Hegelian thing. I think they're setting us up for a civil war. And here's what I'm concerned about. I talk a lot about the fourth turning. And I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but Strauss and Howe's book, they wrote in the early 90s, they wrote Generations, and then they followed it up like 2 years later with the fourth turning. The reason we use the terms millennial and things like that is because those are things that they coined. They said, we've got generations that are about 20 years apart. And they said in every fourth generation, we have a major restructuring of society. And they did that based on going back to American history and then going back actually 500 years to English history, because they said English and American history were kind of synced up. Now they say we're synced up globally. And so they said in the early 90s, sometime in the mid 2000s, there'll be some kind of an economic disruption that'll be global. 2007, 2008, that happened. And then they said, and then there'll be a fourth turning that'll end sometime around 2029. And isn't it interesting that all the globalists want their new society in place by 2030? Now, all of these fourth turnings are typically a war. They typically have a war, but they always have an economic component to it. And usually it's because people are sick and tired of these institutions. They're corrupt. They want to change everything. And so when we look at the time that we're in, there's not much time left. It's going to be this next administration where a lot of things are going to happen. And I think everything is getting weird. It's accelerating. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And I've said, since I've been talking about this, since I've been on air, and I said, this fourth turning, I don't know if it's going to be, the previous fourth turning was the Great Depression, World War II. Prior to that, the Civil War. Prior to that, the American Revolution. I said, I don't know if it's going to be a world war and a depression and a civil war and a revolution. It could be all three if we're not, if we're unfortunate here. But I don't really know what's going to happen. But I do know that they understand the timing. That's why they're talking about 2030. They understand the timing. The vast majority of Americans don't understand what's going on. They're just reacting to what these people are throwing at us.
Yeah, exactly. Which I call the, kind of the dangly cat toy kind of thing. Every news story is like, look over here, and something else goes on. But I want to come back to the Civil War part. I really do want to make sure we discuss that. But because we're talking about the behind the scenes entity. Well, you made a great point about how in the past the technology got to a point, or that rather they had a plan that wasn't able to be initiated because the technology wasn't there, and eventually it was, and it got rolled out. The internet, I see the same thing happening, which I'm sure you agree with, in regard to, any number of directions. The nanotechnology, the Great Reset, the injections, the mRNA, like these have been laid out for a long time, and now suddenly it's happening. And I would argue that's why we've seen this kind of initiation of this next phase. But you mentioned the people, the same people behind all of them. What do you view that as? It's kind of a nebulous thing, right? Whether it's the behind the scenes ruling factions or whatever, but what do you see that as?
Well, I'm a Christian, and so when I look at this, a lot of people look at it and say, well, we got these interlocking families, or we've got these organizations, or we got the Freemasons, or the Illuminati, or we got the Rothschilds, or this, that. Those are all factors in that.
Right.
But ultimately, I look at this as a Christian as a spiritual war, and so that's why I think this continues to go in a particular direction. But when we look at the people who are the actual people who are doing this type of thing, it is there is a definite move towards this, and we can see all of these different institutions that you can identify who've been talking about this for decades. I mean, when I refer to it as kind of Hitchcock's MacGuffin. He would talk about, well, they're all chasing the MacGuffin. What is the MacGuffin? Well, it could be the Maltese Falcon, or it could be the plans for a new airplane or something like that. But it's whatever motivates the characters. It doesn't really matter itself. And so the pandemic was a MacGuffin. The climate change stuff is a MacGuffin. What they really want out of those things is to tag us and to track us and to depopulate us and all these other things. And all of those things flow into it. When you go back and look at the climate MacGuffin, for example, in the late 1960s, you had Paul Ehrlich, who's doing the population bomb and things like that, the Club of Rome. And then they move it into the climate and the environment. First, it was about cleaning up pollution and everything. We got too many people, too much pollution. And then it became about a new ice age. And they did that for about 8 years. And all of a sudden, they just flipped the switch and is now about global warming. But they still wanted to do the same things. And so it's like, well, wait a minute, how do you have the same solution for both for both of these things when they're diametrically opposite of each other? And then they did it again with the pandemic. Same type of stuff, tag us and track us and reduce the number of people and all the rest of this stuff. So, they have this agenda that they want to move towards, where they have global governance, whether or not you see an actual physical place of where the government is going to be, or whether it's just this, this network of agreements behind the scenes and that type of thing. I think it is very interesting. Several times I went to the Bilderberg group, and that's always super quiet, and you can't hardly ever get pictures. We got pictures in Copenhagen, but that's very rare that you're getting pictures. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nothing is seen. And yet contrast that, which would typically happen in June, sometime around that time. But in January, they would have Davos, and there they wanted everybody to see everything that they were doing. And they bring celebrities in and everything. And it's like, what's up with that? When you look at Davos, you got Klaus Schwab. He's the prototypical James Bond Nazi. It's all these characters are straight out of Central Casting.
Right.
And they want you to see this, and they want you to focus on what they're going to show you at Davos. And so part of it is a revelation of method, and part of it is a distraction away from the real business that's being done at some of these other meetings. And there's so many of these different organizations. I just mentioned a couple of them, Bilderberg, Club of Rome, but there's so many of them. That's where the real work gets done.
Yeah, what's interesting there is that I often point this out, that I agree with you entirely, but I also wonder, because we're aware of what Bilderberg is to such a degree that it's basically a talking point, it's like a general conversation these days. I just wonder whether that's even what, that it's been moved somewhere else, right? That they still have that, it's still a name, and the reason I bring that up is because I want to kind of quickly overlap this. I mean, it's a very esoteric and gigantic conversation, but you recently made a post about the Olympics. And Matt Ehret put up an article today for TLAV that brings this really deep into the paganism and the symbolism and all the stuff that was involved there, but brings it back to a really interesting kind of duopoly conversation that goes back centuries. The idea of how these same powers, in a lot of ways showing from Christianity and different Abrahamic religions sort of being infiltrated by these pagans to intentionally bring things down. And the idea being that for this very long period of time, we've been dealing with this kind of infiltrations and the sort of, a two-party type of illusion. And my point is, I see that in a way with what we're talking about, where you've got the Davos forward-facing, this is what we want you to see, and then the other one over here, and really both of them are frauds. Then maybe it's somewhere else happening entirely, and we get trapped in these kind of binary ways to look at things. So you made a post about the Olympics and all the conversation there. So one, I just wanted your thoughts on that and how you see that. His point was that ultimately what we're seeing from through France and the location, but the elitists sort of projecting this new change into, I like a Malthusian kind of mind belief of where we're, it's okay, doing wrong things is sort of a way to find good. It's like this dark way to view the world. And so I just wanted your thoughts on what you saw there and what you see in that same kind of mindset.
Yeah, there's so many different things in Paris. I mean, first of all, the massive amount of surveillance that's there, and the fact that they changed laws, and that's not going to go away. And so, but we got to have it because of Paris. And then you look at the mayor there, Hidalgo. She is a hardcore Marxist environmentalist. That's where the 15-minute city stuff began, was there. And you had the yellow vest protests because she's trying to shut down all the cars years ago. They can't even clean up the Seine River. Spent huge amounts of money on it, but so there's and then what they're doing in the Olympic Village in terms of the cardboard beds and not letting them have meat, not letting them have air conditioning. So there's all of that aspect of it. I kind of joked when I talked about it. I said, what are they going to do? They're going to use that to have some Olympic athletes endorse that kind of austerity. Maybe they'll have, some cereal that's made out of bugs and say, look, this is what we ate at the Olympics, just like they put Bruce Jenner on the cover of some of the stuff. So maybe that's part of it there. But then the whole thing that they did is as I was talking to Peter Hammond, he's a guy who's lived in South Africa for a very long time. He was there fighting the Marxists. He had a very interesting back and forth with Nelson Mandela. And he was Nelson Mandela was he led a large group of Christians in because they were legalizing abortion and doing a bunch of things like that. And so the next day he gets called in to meet with Mandela. And so he said, well, you're fighting me because you're racist or white. And he goes, no, I was fighting you because you're a Marxist. And so there you have this back and forth that with him, because he's gone as a missionary into Marxist nations and the Muslim nations. And one of the things that's kept him alive, kept him from being tortured, is he gets into these philosophical arguments with both the Muslims and the Marxists. They do like to talk about philosophy and religion and things like that. So he's happy to talk to them about that. And his take on the Olympics was that it was a very deliberate juxtaposition, especially the Lord's Supper type of thing. Here's they've got the god of Bacchanalia, Dionysius, and he's there blue like he's dead. So it's kind of, you have in the Christian communion, you have the wine and the bread. The bread represents Christ's body that was broken, and the wine represents his blood that was shed for our sins. And he said they reversed all that. And so it's simply about wine, and it's simply about the body as sexual debauchery and everything. So it's not about saving people from their sins, but it's kind of a celebration, a bacchanalia of celebrating that sin. And he said, and it's very deliberate. He said, if you go back and you look at the original Olympics and the pagan society that was there, it's kind of strange that was picked as a model anyway, because it was incredibly violent. Sometimes people died. They had animal sacrifices. It was built into all this stuff. And he said, but this is the type of thing that the elites want. And when you look at all this total package, we look at the surveillance and the tracking and the debauchery and all the rest of the stuff. This is what they want to do to collapse Western society. And so they're showing that to us, and they're showing us the society that they want us to rebuild. And it's very different from what we have. I mean, even you have atheists like Richard Dawkins saying, well, I don't like Christianity, I don't like your Christ, but I do like the fruit of this. I like the Christian culture and the architecture and the art and the legal system. I don't want to be ruled by Muslims or this, that. But, this is really coming from the technocracy. Which is a very different thing. And I think a lot of people are still trying to struggle to get their head around the difference between the technocrats and the Marxists and the socialists and the Muslims, who have all these different philosophies. Sometimes they take elements from each other, but they're distinct things. But he looks at it and he says, yeah, I like the culture of Christianity, just doesn't believe it. And we saw a little bit of that from Elon Musk in terms of what he was saying. Of course, he's a technocrat, but and the Olympics and what these people are trying to push, it's a very pagan system that is overlaid and enabled now by this technology that they have.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I see a lot of the points in there being, almost like some of the arguments Matt was making in the article, that historically it's about sort of driving the population to an extreme, well, really from the elite perspective or elitist perspective, that it's about kind of both sides of that coin. And the idea being like you drive people into the extreme level, which then justifies the necessity, like having a free society, however you perceive that, the necessity to have extreme leadership, like a dictator or a ruler. Like it's kind of like this constant cycle of rationalizing the top-down control, or are these many different angles of the way this has been abused. But the general point being that what we're seeing there seems to be the intention to drive us into a position that makes us easier to control, and a lot of different angles around it. So it's just really disconcerting to see such a flagrant, I mean, obviously insulting aspects to many different perspectives of religion, but the idea that it's almost against all of those things, it's
and not even just the religious course. They had like the pale rider, out of Revelation, and clear reference to that. But then the reference to the decapitation of Marie Antoinette and that type of thing. I mean, they really are pushing. What they're pushing is chaos and death and debauchery and things like that. I mean, it is really, and you can even see that with the French Revolution aspect of it. Like you said, why don't they do Joan of Arc or something like that? I mean, there's a lot of French heroes that they could do. Why would they celebrate, that bloody revolution that even turned in on itself? But when we look at the way they're controlling us, one of the things that concerns me is the fact that both the left and the right, who are caught up in this Hegelian, thing, both of them want their problems solved in Washington. And what is happening is so much power and money is being focused and poured into Washington. And I see it with the MAGA people as much as I see it with the old line socialist and leftist radicals. Washington should fix it, and there needs to be, we need to make a federal case out of everything and a law about everything. And now you see that happening really with the right as well. And even more so, it's focused around Trump. I was very concerned when I saw that type of thing focused around Obama. When Obama first appeared, everybody was, this is great. This, and kind of this idolatry and worship of Obama, and the way that we talk about how people idolize a pop star or a movie star or something like that. And then the same thing happened with Trump. And, so both of these sides are thinking that the only way that they're going to get everything solved is with this particular person in that particular office. And so even this last week, when you had the stock market crash on Monday, both Trump and J.D. Vance are saying, where was Lala? Where was Kamala or whatever? And it's like, that's not her job, first of all. I mean, but it's like they're pushing forward this idea that everything, good or bad, needs to come from Washington. And the right has bought into that now as much. It used to only be the left, but now the right has bought into it. And I'll just say one more thing. At the end of Obama's 8 years, you had Harry Belafonte, who was, hardcore leftist. And he said about Obama, he said, we don't know who this guy is. We projected onto him what we wanted him to be. And that's exactly what is happening now with Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a really terrifying concept for those that can seem to see it outside of the partisan lens. So what I was saying before can bring these together, which is essentially, like you mentioned, the bloody Civil War, which, as I understand the history, that's essentially what brought an end to that was the, claiming the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte, taking control as a God-man dictator, essentially, right? That was essentially what going forward. And my point would be that this is sort of the creation of these things. And we can see this happening right now where, like, the logical conclusion, especially if you're in manufactured chaos to where people are desperate, they don't know, they're uncertain, the things aren't happening the way they usually had in the past, suddenly it's easier to rationalize more extreme control and change, right? Like we saw through the Great Reset, where it's not far-fetched to see somebody like Trump, who quite frankly I think is the selection, and we can talk about that if you like, stepping in and going, well, look at what the left has done. Look at what we have to do to change. And then you get the right, as we're seeing, start embracing things that challenge what they, like, their core tenets of belief, constitutional mindset. And so that is kind of this general way this goes, and then you get a dictator, and it's this kind of cycle that can be. They love to frame that. I saw Elon share a tweet like this, going like, "Hard times create good men," and like this cycle of how these things work. And it's like, well, in most cases, you're highlighting it doesn't go from hard times to good men; it goes from hard times to authoritarian dictators, and you look back and frame them as good men. It's usually the way that goes. But so I wonder, that's my worry about the way this is happening. Coming back even to the Civil War point, is that they're driving us into this mindset to where that'll just allow them to justify more extreme top-down control. And I'm willing to bet you, whether left or right, it'll dovetail with the Great Reset conversation. That's my worry.
Oh, absolutely. Klaus Schwab is always talking about the fourth industrial revolution, right? And so, and in a sense, it's like, this is a fourth turning, and it is very much like the Industrial Revolution in the sense that if you go back and look at the American Civil War wasn't about slavery, really. It was about in the Industrial Revolution. And I can pretty much prove that point by taking a look at what was happening in Europe at the same time. Between 1861 and 1865, at exactly the same time we had our Civil War, they had a civil war in Italy as well. Slavery was not the issue. What was the issue was the transition from an agrarian society to an industrial society, and a transition from decentralized agrarian society, which both Italy and the United States had, as well as the creation of the nation states. It was also going on with Germany and things like that. And so the consolidation of these decentralized agrarian power centers into a centralized nation state that was industrialized. And that was going on, especially in Italy, but in other European places as well. At the same time, it was happening in the United States. And so they understand there's these economic and technical forces, there's these generational forces, and they're all converging at this point in time. And you're right, it's going to be, regardless of who's there, they're going to try to push us in this more totalitarian direction. The American Revolution was unusual in the sense that it didn't go in a more totalitarian direction, but it easily could have. There were people within, the group we call the Founding Fathers, like Hamilton, who wanted to make it just another kingship or something like that. So it was because of the influence of a few individuals who pushed it the other way that didn't happen. But yeah, I think the likelihood is it usually does go down into a more totalitarian, more authoritarian thing. And this time around, what really makes this different is the massive amount of technology that they can bring to bear when you're talking about genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotech, all of that stuff. We haven't even seen, nanotech is so difficult for us to assess. We don't know if they're doing it to us now. They could do it to us and they could blame it on some kind of a pandemic or something like that. There's these things that are even invisible. The stuff that we can see is bad enough. There's stuff that you can't see, the genetics and the nanotech, that's even worse.
That conversation, as my audience knows, that keeps me up at night. Like the reality of the smart dust. And if you barely look into this, realizing that it's not something that's in the future, it's something that's been researched and implied in the past already. And so it's just, as they hold up these clunky, large things like this is the future microchip. And it's like, they're so far past these things. It really does worry me. But yeah, I think that this is the clear kind of direction. And the concern is that so many people are choosing not to see it, and so let's talk a minute about the conversation of, sort of as I think David Icke is given credit for coining the mainstream alternative media, the MAM, as he points at Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, like numerous Twitter sensations. And then on the other side of that, I see the Elon Musk, Trump, JD Vance, Peter Thiel, like technocrat politician overlap and all of this kind of converging into something very terrifying. And seeing through that, the ability to convince a lot of, and the way I would argue is like the Republicans, which I see they're like the team sport politics players, and then a lot of conservatives that are in varying positions that might not believe it all. But when I'm talking about the left, right, I talk about the Republicans in this, the Republicans being played into accepting a lot of this, as I think Catherine Austin Fitts framed it as the Republicans manipulating conservatives into the technocratic control structure. I mentioned the conversation of the SAVE Act. I don't know if you talked about that at all, but I personally see this as sort of a Trojan horse for digital ID. So I wanted your thoughts on that whole overlap. You've worked in the past with InfoWars, so you have an insight into kind of that mindset and the direction, and you've been very clear about your thoughts on that over the past. And so I want your thoughts on, where you see this going, and, do you see any level of this being legitimate? Just your general thoughts on that direction.
Well, it's interesting. This week, somebody sent to me a reminder of it was conspiracy theories or something on this program that Jesse Ventura used to have, right?
Mm.
And they said, "Oh, look at this! Alex Jones had this so right, a decade ago when he was on with Jesse Ventura." And they were talking about the pandemic, and basically it wasn't anything new. It was something that they kicked off with Dark Winter in 2001. They'd already been practicing it annually for 10 years. And so, it's like, oh, look, we just figured this out type of thing. Well, it was fine. What they were saying at that point in time was true. And I knew that he knew that and had always talked about that. And he had always talked about adjuvants and, aluminum and mercury and things like that, and vaccines and the danger of that and the connections to autism and everything. So it was really surprising to me to see all this stuff just flip in 2020. Right. And, I knew that he'd become partisan. He was always would say, well, I don't really like either one of the parties and that type of thing. He wouldn't pick sides, but he picked sides big time as soon as Trump came in. And especially when Trump gave him the interview, he was all about that. But at the same time I saw that, I saw another picture of Jesse Ventura looking over Tim Walz, who has just signed some bill. I don't know what it was about, and but beaming, yeah, that's great, And I thought, both of them, when you look at what happened in 2020, the stuff that they told people and warned people about for 10 years, the stuff that they knew, they just turned their back on it and told them something completely different. And, I said, wait a minute, when we look at this, and I had all of 2020, I was at loggerheads with the people at InfoWars because they were pushing the fear button and the panic button about the virus, and said, this is a game that they've played, and we don't know that this thing is real. We haven't seen any evidence of a pandemic anywhere. We've heard, right, these people are locking down, all the rest of the stuff, but he was selling a lot of products. So you could write it off as just, crass commercialism from him and from, Mike Adams. And it was, things really came to a head when David Icke came on and said, this is all BS. Right. And that was kind of a turning point, because up to that point, Mike Adams had been pedal to the metal about fear, and so had Alex. And then when David Icke came on, Alex brought him, and Alex will do that. He'll bring in somebody who's on the opposite side just to kind of hedge his bets, so he can always say he was right. Right. And so when he brought him on, Mike Adams got really upset about that and said, well, I'm the only person in the alternative media that's got a science degree. It's like, oh, really? What is your science degree? He doesn't say where he went to school, what his degree is in, anything like that. He keeps it, but anyway, so, I'm upfront about the fact I've got a science degree. So what, it's about critical thinking, and it's about sticking to what you already know, instead of flipping 180 degrees away. For what? For money, or because somebody who's been controlling you is telling you to do this or that? And so we got into a thing, Mike Adams and I did, and eventually got, it wasn't just about the issues. It was, kind of a personal thing. But then Alex started even pushing this idea that, well, this is the Trump vaccine, it's okay. And I had somebody that I'd interviewed contacted me, and it's like, well, I don't know, I don't have the time to watch Alex's show, but I can't believe that he would say that. And then he did it while I was sitting next to him one day as the show is ending, and we got 30 seconds. They're playing the music, and we're going out, and I can't say anything. He's talking, and the music's going, and it's out like that. And he says, and of course, it's not the bad vaccine, that Trump is putting through. He's putting this, and it's like, what is he talking about? And then I guess it was about 4 or 5 months ago, somebody sent me a couple of clips of both something he said in the studio, as well as a set piece that he had done, saying that Trump is going to protect us with a good vaccine, and that you can take this. It's all going to be some kind of a dead or weakened thing, and it's just going to have a little bit of aluminum and mercury in it. It's okay. You can take that. It's going to be basically sugar water. It's what he said. Yeah. And I played that over again, and it's like, what in the world is he talking about? That's antithetical to everything that he has talked about for 20 years.
Also,
so when you
what's that? It's also false. Please continue.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is that you can have people out there that'll tell people the truth, and they'll do it for a very long time. And then when it comes to the push comes to shove, they'll flip it. Right. And that's when they've gained the people's trust. It's a classic con job. And it's what controlled opposition does. It's what double agents do, and intelligence community, and all the rest of the stuff. And then he did it again with the January the 6th stuff. 2 days after the election, he's got Steve Pachinik on, who is admitted being CIA. He was involved in Operation Gladio. He was working for Henry Kissinger, all of the things that Alex Jones is supposedly against. And this guy comes on and says, yeah, we got 2 days after the election, there's 20,000 National Guard out there right now. They're arresting people. And we've created blockchain watermark ballots. And we know exactly who rigged this election, all the rest of the stuff. That got 4 million views. You had Clarence Thomas's wife sent that video to Mark Meadows and said, I hope this is true. Well, it was not possible at all. I mean, the next morning I came in and I was, saying, this is not true. It's a lie. And I had big things privately as well as publicly when I was there at InfoWars. And then eventually, after the day that they did the Electoral College votes on December the 14th, I said, it's over, folks. We don't need to do January the 6th. Anything else about this is a grift. And of course, that whole weekend where Alex had been out doing fundraisers, and that was the weekend that he said, whatever it takes, we're not going to let Biden in the White House. And so I was telling people, don't go. And I said that to people, and I continued after I was fired. And I told people up to that morning, I said, it's a trap. There's going to be agent provocateurs. They're going to come after you, and they're going to use it for all the conservatives. But the problem is most of these people in MAGA, they are kind of newbies. They don't really know anything about history or politics, and they're easily manipulated. And they're projecting what they want onto Donald Trump or whatever, and they're being controlled by this media that David Icke's talking about, the new alternative mainstream media.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And, I mean, your integrity is very clear. You've stood by these things, and time has shown that you're correct. I think that's what really matters. But the sad part, which is kind of one of the points we're highlighting here, is and I don't know if I think it's the majority or not. I'm kind of hoping it's not. But how many people, and it's still a lot, choose to just ignore that?
Or fight me on it. I mean, I still say, you're a liar. It's like, I'm the liar. I mean, do you understand what happened in the last 4 years? Did you see what happened on January the 6th? And you tell me I'm the liar? It's crazy how angry the MAGA people are. I've had to get a pretty thick skin because it just keeps coming. They were telling me that after it happened, January the 6th, now leave Trump alone. He's out of this. It's like, he's not going anywhere. He's going to still be around. But, they get so angry because they're so invested in a person. They're invested in Trump, or they're invested in Alex Jones, or they're invested in Tucker Carlson or whatever. They don't want to hear anything else. They've got to see, this is part of the problem, is that they have defined their life around politics. And there's something that is far more important than politics, but because that's everything to them, and because they can't think of any way to get what they want unless they've got a benevolent dictator in Washington, that's the way they organize their life. And that's what's going to drive us into a civil war if we don't push back against that.
Right. 100%. Let me ask you one thing about what you said there, because it's interesting. I mean, it's something you said earlier in the conversation already tells me that you believe that there's cheating all the time in elections. But I'm sure people will try to pluck out what you said there in regard to January 6th and the ballots. I saw a post you were doing about this. You had an interview about this as well, saying that ultimately that Trump lost, and the lie of the stolen election and so on. Now, that being a stated, let's just call that a fact based, that not people can decide for themselves. I recommend you look into it. But my point is, do you then alternatively think that there was also cheating? Like, do you think that those two things exist in the conversation?
Yes, I do. And the thing is, the guy that I had on, he was he was hired by the Trump organization to do an audit, and he'd done that type of thing many times before. So he's an expert. He'd been an expert witness and things like that. And so his organization went through and gave their report. And they said, we can find some fraud, but it's not anywhere close to what you need to change things around. They also did, and I think the key thing about that interview, I thought it was interesting what he did for the Trump organization. And he had a debate with Mike Lindell. And he and Mike Lindell had different ideas about what should be done. And I lean more towards what Mike Lindell said should be done. I mean, I lean more towards paper ballots, and, let's go full Neanderthal. We all vote on one day and we get our thumb purple or whatever. That's what they did when they wanted to run an election in Iraq. So we do something like that and just kind of brute force it through. You're still going to have some cheating with any kind of a system, of course. Right. But when you start to bring in the machines, the very fact that the machines can count things faster and they can multiply, give you a multiplying effect on your labor, it also gives a multiplying effect on any kind of manipulation.
Right.
And I've been talking since 2014 about Smartmatic and how that was created by two or three friends of Hugo Chavez. And, and they've had one scandal after the other, several different provinces in Mexico, as well as the Philippines, as well as Brazil. And so it's not anything new. And they're not the only one. It's all these different electronic things have that kind of liability to them. But the thing that I thought was interesting, and I had talked about Venezuela, is the fact that what the State Department will do is they will do exit polls, and they look at the result of the exit polls versus the official results. If they see more than a 5% spread, then they say, well, it was rigged. And we have that same organization, Edison Research, does the exit polls for all of America. And when you hear it reported, they will never give you that kind of a comparison. Never, ever. And of course, the Republicans and Democrats won't do it either. What does that tell you? It tells you, I think, that they both got their little enclaves where they're cheating, and they don't want to expose that, right? So, they're both passing cards on the table, and they don't want to call the other guy out because they're doing the same thing with their guys. But the other aspect of it that could be the case is that Edison Research is also dishonest. So we don't know, but it brings that up. And when I asked him about the exit polling, he said, well, the Trump organization actually did exit polling. And he said what their exit polling showed was that there were a lot of people who had voted for Trump in 2016 who were fed up with him because of what happened in 2020 and refused to vote for him. And so there was a lot of people that had abandoned Trump, and a lot of ballots, he said, where they had where it wasn't, you hear people say, well, if there's a rigged election, if they only voted for the president, they didn't vote down ballot. He said there was a lot of ballots where they voted all down ballot, but they didn't vote for president. And a lot of Republican ballots that were like that. And so, you look at some of these things, it's very plausible. Steve Bannon said on October the 31st, when he was meeting with a lot of the Chinese friends of this Chinese billionaire Guo, the Communist Party guy who's supposedly now opposed to them, but he's been convicted of fraud. Anyway, he was meeting with those people, and on October 31st, just a few days before the election, he said, so here's what's going to happen. Whatever happens, we're going to say Trump won it. They're going to say, no, he didn't. We're going to say, F you and all the rest of it. We're going to do whatever we want, that type of thing. So there was all that kind of stuff that was happening. The fact that we did vote by mail to a larger extent than we had ever done before because of the so-called pandemic, which I didn't believe for a moment, and then kept that in, through to the election with Georgia on January the 5th, and we still got that in place. So there's all these different things that are there. Yeah, there's cheating going on, and I told people, I said, yeah, there's never been an honest election in my lifetime because it starts with who's on the ballot. If you're going to restrict the ballot access, and look at what we're seeing right now, with Cornel West and with RFK Jr., they didn't want to have, and the other guy, Dean, they don't want to have any competition on the Democrat side. And now all the people who did vote for the one candidate, Biden, they get their vote thrown out, on the Democrat side. But it begins with ballot access. It continues with access to the debates. They don't want to have access to the debates. So everything about it is rigged. They talk about how the news media rigs the information and everything. But if you control the ballot and you control the debates, you're rigging it already.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that, but I'm also have to say that I'm of the opinion, and maybe it's not always been this way, but that our vote really doesn't translate to the outcome anyway. And that may just be an extension of where we are. But I agree that, the point is that both those things can exist in the conversation. The claim is self-serving and not actually rooted in fact from Trump, but also that there's cheating on every side all the time. And it makes me kind of where it's going now with Trump in this election, in my opinion, of him kind of being the choice. And before all of this, that it kind of all starts to make a lot more sense using all of these conversations. And it all seems to be driving in one clear direction, which worries me. So
it's driving in the direction of chaos, I think. And Trump 100%. Is the chaos agent. I've said he's kind of the Mason-Dixon line of the new Civil War.
Yeah. He
gets everybody energized on both sides, for and against. Big energy all around Trump. He's the central focus of this. And so the question is, are they going to put him in office and then, have this percolate through, a little bit into the future? Or do they want this incident to happen right now? They want to bring it to a head now. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know either, and I don't think anybody does, other than the people trying to drive this. But
Mhm.
let me. I was gonna. I want. We only have little bit more time, but I wanted to go. Let's go into this a little bit further, actually. So the election itself coming. If I don't know what if you I don't know if you agree in general with the idea whether your vote doesn't translate or not, but that being one of the potential points in all of this, how do you see this going? Like the complete speculation. But if we're talking about something that seems to very clearly be driving chaos, and very well, we could both be wrong, and this could just be organic, but nonetheless is still chaotic. Clearly, people are divided. Clearly, there is very extreme, heightened levels of hatred and vitriol. So, how do you see this all playing out? Because they're both already going, they've already cheated, or we're going to have to cheat to save democracy. Like
Yeah.
it's a ridiculous cartoon at this point. So what do you think?
Yeah, there's no talk of reform, is there? It's
Yeah.
always about vengeance,
Right.
revenge and that type of thing. And then we know that what they want is chaos. Take a
Mhm.
look at what Soros has done. He's installed these district attorneys and sometimes state attorneys general to just let criminals out on the street because he wants chaos. Look at what they did with Black Lives Matter riots in the summer of 2020. But then also look at the chaos that was imposed, and Trump was paying for it. The governors were doing it, but it was, all the people, it's just the Democrat governors. No, it wasn't. I see people talking about how Walsh bribed teens $100,000. You might win if you take the jab. Well, that was despicable. But, DeWine, who was a Republican, was doing it, I believe, before Waltz was, and he was offering $1 million if you take the vaccine, as an incentive. So they were all doing the same thing, and they were all being paid with fiat cash out of Washington. And even though Trump is out there saying, well, we could have HCQ or we could have ivermectin, he throws that out there like a straight, like a comedian, and then the straight man is Fauci, who says, oh, you're silly, you can't do that. And Trump could have manufactured ivermectin instead of manufacturing ventilators that killed people.
Right.
So he could have easily put that out. So you look at all of this stuff and you understand that was all about chaos. The lockdown and the pandemic was about chaos, just like the Black Lives Matter stuff was about chaos. And Elon Musk, even though I don't like Elon Musk, and I'm really banned on Twitter, heavily banned shadow banned on Twitter still. Right. But he did say something about Soros and about where elections matter, and he said Soros puts his money at the local level because he gets bigger bang for his buck. You start throwing your money into these races where there's $1 billion floating around, it's pretty hard to have an influence. But if you go into, you put $1 million into a local race, you can get one of these chaos agents as a district attorney. And so I really do believe that it is at the local level. And I don't want to just blackpill people. I do believe that there's things that we can do at the local level. First of all, it starts with us. Right. And it starts with us getting our family together, getting our relationship right with God, learning how to do skills, starting to grow our own food, meeting our neighbors, working with our neighbors, starting to try to get good people into local office. I know that that's a really difficult thing, but you can have more of effect there than you can in Washington. Right. And so, that's where you need to start focusing from the bottom up, to try to build systems around yourself, and you'll in the process have a richer, fuller life as well if you start to do something like that. And so I think they want to focus, they want to isolate us. They want us to focus all of our hopes and fears on Washington, and those two things are just a path to destruction, and that's what we really need to push back against, I think.
I agree completely. And I think that's actually a really good note to end on right there. I was going to get a little bit into Twitter and the kind of overlap, and, the point just to make the same. And this, we were briefly talking before about the GARM overlap and how clearly there's this weird lie about being involved with it while pretending to sue it. And, I think that my concern is that through all of this, clearly Twitter is playing a central role, but just social media in general and the kind of divide and the bots and Israeli bots and the foreign policy, that clearly we're being gamed right now. And the concern is that it's, as I've pointed out over the years, it oscillates. It's a teeter-totter. COVID-19, I think it's obvious that the left was far more manipulated, far more focused on now it's going the other direction. I think primarily with the Israel conversation, but in a lot of different ways. And
that was part of what Trump was able to bring to the table. He was able to pacify the people in a way that Hillary Clinton couldn't have. You know, if Hillary Clinton had tried the same garbage that Trump did in 2020, the right would have risen up. And so that's one of the things when you look going forward, maybe that's how they're going to use Trump again. You know, maybe they'll just use him to kick off a civil war. Maybe they'll use him as a giant pacifier in the mouth of MAGA. That's what he was used to start with. I think.
That is a really great and a horrifying image and a great analogy. You know, I've said that so many times, and I usually reference it with Obama. But my point is that if it was, you're right, if it was Clinton that won or just any other Democrat in that position, they did a fraction of what Trump did. Yeah. Of course, that during Obama he would blink hard and they would scream martial law. You know, it's like it's clear that, and we probably should be, but it was literally rolled out production martial law, literally created the infrastructure for all of what handed the baton off to Biden. So it is terrifying to see that so many people can't see past that. And I guess
can you imagine
today,
let me just say, can you imagine if Obama or Hillary had said, take the guns and do the due process later? Yeah. or don't worry, I can ban the bump stocks on my own. I don't need your help.
It's willful ignorance. People, they have their chosen ideologue. They don't want to see it. And it's clearly, as I'm sure we both agree, it's on both sides of that paradigm. It's just your government manipulating you. But this is all just largely today a call to hope people can stand back, take a breather, and look and see the bigger picture and recognize that the government is trying to play you, and this is why I respect your work so much, David, is because you stand with your integrity and, you stand by what you believe in clearly through thick and thin. And I think that deserves praise. And so thank you for joining me today and continue to do this work. And I'd love to connect again as more chaos ensues and talk again.
I'd love to. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I'm afraid it's going to be interesting times, isn't it? And I just say look at what happened in 2020 and how different it was in different jurisdictions. And that should underscore to you the importance of things happening at the local level. That's difficult, but it's really the only place I think we've got any hope left, really.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me, David, again. And, anything else you want to leave us with on the way out, upcoming events or, things you're going to be putting out soon or anything?
No, if you want to find the show, you can go to thedavidknightshow.com, and we have where the show is. We did the show live, and then we put up archives on several different video platforms as well as an audio podcast. So you can find links to all that stuff there. It can be pretty hard to find me if you just use the search engine, especially if the search engine is Google. They work pretty hard to try to keep me quiet. So if you go to thedavidknightshow.com, that's where you can find the stuff.
Absolutely. I'll be included in the show notes below. So make sure you check that out. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.